I'm Ruben Esquivel. I'm chairman of the board of the Dallas County Historical Foundation, which is the organization responsible for the 6th floor museum at Dealey Plaza. On behalf of our board and our staff, I'm glad to greet all of you here tonight. I wouldn't be doing a proper job as a chair and perhaps put in jeopardy my position if I was to miss the opportunity of introducing another board member that's present here. Jill Johnson, if you would please stand and be recognized. We're glad to have you here today. It is my honor today to introduce our moderator, and she will in turn introduce our panelists. The discussion today is going to be the 6th program that we have had the pleasure to host as part of the Call to Action activities. Since May, we have been honored to present an array of personal histories, many of them told by activists inspired by President Kennedy. It is our hope that audiences gathered in this gallery are also motivated by their message of responsible citizenship and public service. Tonight, we're delighted to host a distinguished group of panelists who will share their unique perspectives on the Hispanic struggle for a political voice. Our moderator, Mercedes Olivera, is a Dallas native and graduate of Ursuline Academy, the University of Dallas, and New York University. In 1975, she joined the Dallas Morning News, becoming the first Hispanic woman to write a weekly column for any major metropolitan newspaper. In 1996, she was named a Fulbright Scholar and taught classes in communications at the Universidad de las Américas, Puebla, in Mexico. In addition to writing weekly columns about local, state, national, and international issues concerning Latinos, she has conducted research on Mesoamerican goddesses and the Virgin of Guadalupe. Her current projects include a history of Latinos in North Texas and serving also as a member of the research faculty for the Old Red Museum. Now, please join me in welcoming our moderator, Mercedes Olivera.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me okay. I'm going to introduce the panel today who are going to share their experiences with us, their thoughts, what they've learned, what they felt. I think this is a really important time that we're living in right now because of the growth of the Latino community in Dallas. Everybody's looking back and saying, what is the history of Latinos? All of a sudden, people see all these Latinos here and think that, well, they just got here. And in reality, this community has been growing, has been here for quite some time, and has been growing over the years. And some of the people that watch this community grow are with us tonight. First, I'll introduce Adelfa Callejo. She is an attorney, a Dallas attorney who, as you know, you have, I'm sure, have seen her many, many times at the forefront of many Latino civil rights issues. She has been very, very strong in fighting for Latinos and Latinas as well. She was actually born in the town of Millet in South Texas, and she graduated from Cotula High School. She got her bachelor's and law degrees from Southern Methodist University. After 10 years of night school, by the way, that's when she got her law school, her law degree, and she did it while being married and working full time. She was a member of the founding board of directors of the Dallas Legal Services Project. And she's really been the first in a lot of areas. She was the first to become chairman of the library board, later became chairwoman of the Board of Commissioners of the Dallas Housing Authority. She was vice president of the North Texas Regional Council of Health and is a former member of DART. She's a founder and former president of the Mexican American Bar Association of Texas and has served on the MALDEF board. She's also a trustee of the Tomás Rivera Policy Institute. In political matters, she's been very active in the Democratic Party statewide and nationally. She is a past vice chair of Tejano Democrats. She's also received numerous awards. Among them is the prestigious SMU Law School Distinguished Alumni Award. She also received the Otli Reconocimiento from the Mexican government for her service to the Mexican community. She received the American Bar Association 1998 Spirit of Excellence Award, and so forth and so on. She's received just about every award that an attorney can receive, and a person who has been involved again in the civil rights issues in Dallas. Adelfa, thank you for being here tonight. Next we have Frank P. Hernandez, who, while Adelfa was very active in being an advocate for civil rights, Frank was very active in litigating for civil rights. He was very heavily involved in civil rights issues, and was the first Latino actually to graduate from Southern Methodist University School of Law's day program in 1964. He has been a civil rights attorney in Dallas for 42 years. He was extremely instrumental, essentially, because of the lawsuits that he filed in Dallas. He initiated some major changes in Dallas. He integrated the grand jury in Dallas in 1966. He was one of the founders of the Greater Dallas Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the Dallas Hispanic Bar. He was appointed as the first Mexican-American judge in Dallas County in 1976. He served as president of the League for Educational Advancement, which was instrumental in the desegregation of the DISD school board. He was a member of the Tri-Ethnic Committee and the Dallas Alliance Task Force that created the school desegregation plan that was largely adopted. Something interesting which I found fascinating is that he has appeared before the Supreme Court of the United States 4 times. Twice on the brief, participated in argument once, and argued for Falcon in GTE versus Falcon, I guess that would be. He served on the board of directors for 4 years and as vice president of the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund. He has served on the board of other organizations, including Urban League of Dallas, United Way, and the Dallas Museum of Art. And he was appointed Dallas Film Commissioner by Mayor Steve Bartlett in 1992. And he founded, and this is perhaps one of the things that will be also a very lasting imprint in Dallas culture. He founded the Herculano and Delida Hernandez Foundation in 1996 to promote Latino culture through arts and education, and the Vistas Film Festival in 1999, which just occurred last week and has grown by leaps and bounds. So thank you very much, Frank, for being with us tonight. And lastly, but not least, we have Dr. Roberto Calderon, who's a University of North Texas history professor. He is a leading scholar in the area of Mexican-American history, and is also a scholar on the Chicano civil rights movement and history. He's the series editor of Al Filo, which is the University of North Texas Press Mexican-American series. So I know you're going to be able to put into perspective a lot of what our 2 other panelists will be speaking about tonight, which I think will be great to see what happened here, how it fit in overall into the history of the United States of Latinos. Now, this is going to be as informal as we can make it, so feel free to just jump in at any time and make your comments. I'd like to start out by asking Adelfa and Frank, what do you remember? What was the general racial atmosphere in Dallas during the 50s, 60s, and 70s?
Well, the most significant thing probably was the fact that we had no political representation, and we were not appointed to boards and commissions. We certainly didn't have any elected officials. And so it wasn't until after the 60s, the early 60s, that we began to make some headway.
Now, Frank, you were the first Mexican-American to announce that you were going to run for city council, right?
Right.
In Dallas. When was that?
1969. Actually, right after the SNCC trial, when we represented the Black Americans, Ernie McMillan and Matthew Donald Johnson. Lee Perini and I did, and they got tenure for malicious destruction of private property, to wit, watermelons included. And so, but that's when I announced to run, and then the CCA went and got Anita Martinez to run. And she had that endorsement. And at that time, it was all at large, so the whole city voted. We were set up in 9 separate districts, but it was at large voting. And one of the reasons for running was to set up the lawsuit for single-member districts. But J.O. Pepper Garcia had run for the legislature in 1962. He and L.A. Bedford. L.A. Bedford was a young black lawyer that had come here from Brooklyn. And they ran sort of a tandem for the state legislature. And once again, that was at-large voting, although there were all these districts, but everybody in the county voted for everybody.
That's something that I think a lot of people don't realize today, that back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, the Citizens Council Association,
Citizens
Charter Association was the political arm of the Citizens Council.
Yes.
And pretty much ran the city.
They financed all of the candidates. And when Frank decided to run, announced that he was going to run, they started getting very, they felt threatened. So then they decided to go and look for a Mexican-American candidate that could run, that they would finance. And so, as Frank said, they were all at large elections. It was very difficult. We had so few. Our population was so small. And then, of course, we always have the problem that they don't get out and vote. So it was an uphill battle. We had no money, no resources. I think at the time, there were only, about 7 lawyers, right? In 1966, there were only 7 Hispanic lawyers.
Yeah, probably, because I think I was number 5. You were what, number 3?
Yeah, I was the third. I was the third one. Yeah. Mm-hmm. In
I thought it depended on whether we counted the one whose name Hernandez, but he changed his name. Remember the collection lawyer?
Yes. Things were so bad. Yeah, that's right, Mr. Hardiman.
That's right.
Things were so bad, and there was so much racism and so much prejudice. There was an Hispanic lawyer from New York who changed his name legally to his wife's maiden name in order to avoid the discrimination. And that was a very sad commentary, I think, on the city.
When the CCA picked you as a candidate, you were virtually assured election.
Absolutely.
So when you went against the system, when you went against the CCA, what did you feel? Did you feel like it was this, I'm going to lose, but it's still worth it?
Well, yeah, it was very easy, because back then it was us and them was all white and us was brown and black. And it was pretty simple. They went and got Anita Martinez because she was married to Alfred Martinez, because they had El Phoenix, and she was well known in that regard. She didn't know anything about politics, but they wasn't looking for that. And sort of in addition to that, after she beat me, then 2 years later, the rumor were that they were going to drop her and not put her on the ballot again. And the CCA had the rule that you got 2 terms. So that was the day that I went, Al Lipscomb and I went and picked up the petition, and they thought we were going to run for mayor. So the headlines in the morning news said, Negro Latin to run for mayor. But we said no. I had a press conference and announced I was not running for mayor, and I was not going to run against Anita Martinez unless they dropped her. If they dropped her, then I would run again. So they didn't drop her, and she was unopposed, and she got more votes than anybody.
So
but that was a setup, and then after that, then came Pedro Aguirre, and then we started.
It was a double standard. It was obviously a double standard. That they were going to drop her and not support her. And so Frank and was it Lipscomb?
Yeah,
Lipscomb. If they hadn't gone and protested about that, they probably would have dropped her. And they just used her, And Anita Martinez, to her credit, in spite of the fact that the few of us were all supporting Frank, and she didn't have any support really from the Latino community, because she was only known in the restaurant association circles, and the rest of the people didn't. Or she had not been involved in the struggle.
In civic affairs.
Civil rights, exactly.
Yeah.
But in spite of that, the first thing, to her credit, first thing she did when she got elected, she called some of us and said, give me the list of the people who are interested in serving on boards and commissions, and I will appoint them. And she did that. Absolutely. She appointed each and every one of us. Every board and city board and commission had a Latino on it. That was the beginning. She did that breakthrough.
Mm-hmm. You said something about the time that when you ran for, did you ever run for anything else, by the way?
Judge?
Well, yeah, I ran for mayor.
When was that?
What, when Bartlett ran? When Bartlett won in 92? Yeah.
When you ran for the city council or were thinking about running, did that experience burn you? Did it turn you off? Did it just inspire you to get more involved?
Well, no, it was a strategic move. I never ran a race that I thought I was going to win. Okay? I mean, there was no chance of winning that race. There was no chance of beating Bartlett. There was a slight chance of beating Bartlett, but Van Holmes didn't come and support the Latino candidate like the Latino candidate had supported him. And plus, the Fifth Circuit extended the election by about 6 months, and Bartlett had a chance then to go shore up a lot of the minority support. But no, it's sort of like lawsuits sometimes. You file a lawsuit knowing you're going to lose, but it does change society. It changes what is happening. I mean, you might win, but it'd be unusual because you had an all-white jury. But it's the same way. So strategically, we're attacking the city council, we're attacking state representatives, and trying to get a foothold to make single-member districts, because that was the only way we were going to get representation. And finally, when we did, it was in increments. The city was 8-3.
First.
Okay.
Right.
And it was 14-1 finally, where we're at now. But it didn't just come easily, you think.
Now, some people believe that the system that has evolved now, 14-1, is now no longer viable, that it's not working to keep the city together, that it's kind of dividing the city. What would you say to that?
Well, my opinion would be that it does not. You see, what's happened to the city, remember Schrader?
Mm-hmm. George, yes.
Schrader was the city manager. The way the city was set up, the council was like the board of directors. They were to give advice and counsel. They were not to be able to call the head of the water department and say, go fix that leak. They weren't going to do that. And that's the way it worked from the 30s and 36 when they put that system in, because it was so corrupt in Dallas that they couldn't do business, basically. And so from that point on, well, when Schrader was city manager, he gave in to the pressures of some of the people on the council and started letting them immerse themselves in the day-to-day handling, so transportation, water, those sort of things. And that sort of corrupted the system. And that's what we have now, so that our 14, they think they can run their little fiefdoms. Mm-hmm. But if they don't do that, the system works well.
Sure.
And my whole attitude on it is, if you want at-large like Jim Schultz wants, go to Houston. That's where it's at-large.
It's the micromanagement by the council.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But I think if there's racial division in Dallas, it's due to lack of leadership.
And are you referring to the leadership of the mayor?
Council.
Of the
yes,
council?
the mayor, yeah, sure.
What was the relationship, speaking of that, between the local government and the Mexican-American community back then?
Hostile. It was hostile. As far as what I was doing, it was hostile. Mm-hmm. Adelfa was able to be less of a threat, and we saw it between Adelfa and I and Pedro Aguirre and Pancho Medrano and the whole. We kind of played good cop, bad cop. And so they would say, Frank is going to sue you if you don't do this. And then they'd start thinking about it. Well, that's the way it works.
Yeah.
We're going to get LFs to march with us.
But it was, when I first came here in 61 to go to law school, it was very racist. I mean, you know, look on the wall at the Piccadilly. I mean, that guy had done really bad things. Stood out there with a big, going to beat up all the blacks and everything. But the one thing that the city has always been able to do with the Citizens Charter Association, and when we had the triracial committee that had Les Potter and those people on it, the leaders, Dave Fox and them, they always had the ability to give in a little to calm the minorities, always. So we would have these meetings once a month. Nobody knew about them. They were secret, and you could talk about anything you wanted. It was 6 white, 6 black, 6 brown. Before I got on it was the biracial committee. Then became triracial committee. I didn't understand that, but that's what we did. But you could see that we don't want riots, we don't want this, and so then they would concede a little bit at a time so we wouldn't have any riots.
Well, that was something that the Citizens Council did, or the CCA, they put together that Dallas at the Crossroads film that they showed to everybody all the businesses, and the businesses showed them to their employees in order to avoid a lot of the civil strife that the rest of the country was going through.
The business community did not want a negative light on the city of Dallas. And so as a result of that, because they knew it would hurt the image of Dallas, they were willing to make certain concessions. And so when Frank ran against Anita Martinez, and after that, then they wanted to, they invited, the CCA was all white. They invited 3 Hispanics and 4 blacks to join the inner sanctum. And it was quite an experience because we sat in a room and there were like about 40 of us all together, I think, as I recall. And all of the ethnic minorities, the 7 of us ethnic minorities were over here, and a few Jews or liberal progressive people over here. And the rest of them were all over there, all the CEOs and all of that, who ran the city actually in those days. That's when the Texans owned the businesses, the banks and the insurance companies and all of that, and they were very involved. They were the mayors, really. They were the mayoral candidates. And so we all sat over there, and so we were supposed to, our mission for the 7 of us was to get viable candidates for them to consider so that they could support to run for city council. So we sat around and started getting names together, and we managed to get about 7 names. Tino Ramirez and Pedro Aguirre, and mostly, I guess, the lawyers, because that's what we had really, and professionals. We didn't have very many other professionals. Anyway, and we met and submitted them, and then they interviewed them. And when they interviewed Pedro Aguirre, one of the CEOs, I can't remember which one it was, came over to me and he said, Mrs. Callejo, he's great. Where did you find him? I said, he was born here.
But now, at that point, though, this was what, late 60s then?
Late 60s.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. We had a meeting at Pedro Aguirre's house, and it got down to whether it was going to be Sam Moreno or Pedro Aguirre who was going to be sort of our choice. And then it wound up being Pedro Aguirre.
So the group essentially picked Pedro Aguirre.
Well,
and then,
no, not exactly.
No.
She's got it right. Is that the major group picked it, but then they wanted our group to
what happened was that after they said we had that one guaranteed seat candidate and what have you, we didn't have to raise any money. We had no money anyway, but they were going to finance it just like they did everybody else. But then what happened at the last minute, well, I had been on the chair in the library board, and I had awarded a contract to Pedro Aguirre to build the library on Forest and Greenville. And it had been like in September or October, okay, and this was like 3 months later. And so I asked the city attorney whether that was going to be any kind of a conflict. Was it going to be any kind of a problem? I asked the chair of the CCA, oh no, it's not going to be any kind of a problem. And at the last minute, then Judge Sterrett decided that he wanted that seat for a friend of his in Oak Cliff. And at the very last minute, then they said, well, Pedro Aguirre would either have to give up that commission, okay? Give up, which was a lot of money for him, give that up, and we'd have to select somebody else, okay? And so what happened was Pedro Aguirre decided to give it up, and it was really, he made a tremendous sacrifice to do that. But they were going to take it away from us. And then Sam Moreno was the second choice that they wanted. But they really wanted Pedro, you know,
and Pedro ended up being the candidate.
Because he gave up the commission to design that library. It was the first time an Hispanic architect, Latino architect, was going to get a commission from the city of Dallas. They would never award any kind of commissions to build libraries or fire stations or police stations.
So by then, though, this was what, 1969?
I think so, 68,
60,
later than that.
71, 72. I think he served on the council beginning in 71.
Yeah.
But by then, I think one of the most significant events in the city of Dallas that moved this whole civil rights issue for Latinos was actually the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And you agree with that?
Absolutely, I agree with that. I think if he had not been assassinated, I mean, there was such a tremendous, the nation was on a guilt trip, you know, about the way they treated ethnic minorities. And I don't think Lyndon Johnson would have been able to pass all of that legislation, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights, and all of that. And too bad that because of a tragedy, but that's what happened, I think.
I tend to agree with that.
Do you were you familiar with any movements that supported Kennedy in Dallas, like the Viva Kennedy clubs?
Well, I know you mentioned that. We had Viva Kennedy clubs. They kind of stopped at the end of the election cycle, but then they developed the Political Association of Spanish-Speaking Organizations. They were known as PASO, but PASO was, of course, much stronger in San Antonio and in Crystal City and all in the valley. And but we had a PASO organization up here. It never did too much, but you know, it would meet and do the political things.
So we really didn't have any like Viva Kennedy clubs here. I believe Pancho Medrano may have been involved in the Viva Kennedy club.
Well, Pancho, of course, was all over the state because his job was union organizing. He was very good at it, and so he was a driving force. He always was, but he would spend as much time in South Texas, a lot more time than he did here. Yeah.
Well, what I wanted just to comment on the Viva Kennedy campaign. The Viva Kennedy campaign is an important moment for the Mexican American community as a whole, nationwide, and certainly in the Southwest, because while Mexicanos in the U.S. had been participating in electoral campaigns, presidential campaigns, and voting here in Texas and elsewhere, you know, since the 19th century, Democratic and Republican Party both, and other parties for that matter. You know, the Mexican American community is not approached like the Kennedy campaign approached them in 59, 60 for that election, quite in the same way. Something else happened that coalesces and energizes the Viva Kennedy campaign. You know, of course, the Viva Kennedy clubs are organized locally, but there's direction at the national level, and those were the two elections at the congressional level, at the federal level in California. We had Ed Roybal being elected in 1960 for the first time. Mexicano gets elected to Congress out of California. Dennis Chavez was still around. He was the first Mexican-American senator out of Nuevo Mexico. He was involved at the national level in the coordination of the Viva Kennedy campaign. And the Pancho Medranos, the labor movement is a part of that as well. The veterans organizations are a part of that as well. And I think it covered a wide political spectrum within the Mexicano community who were excited that, you know, someone here was turning to them and saying, hey, you know, you can have a part in this play, in this campaign, and make a difference. And I should add that subsequently there's going to be a Viva Nixon and Viva Johnson and Viva Everybody campaign in the years following. But it was an important moment. There was some dissent subsequent to the election of Kennedy because many in the Mexicano community felt, here in Texas included, felt that the Kennedys hadn't come through with, you know, some of the appointments and so forth to the Mexicano community as were the huge expectations in the Mexican American community that this happened, and it didn't quite translate in the years and months after.
Well, that's interesting. So in Dallas, then we had Pancho Medrano involved in Viva Kennedy. do you know of any other organizations that worked with Viva Kennedy, or did they work with other civil rights groups?
We had the American GI Forum, which, as you know, was founded because a young Mexican-American World War II soldier was denied burial, and what was it, Three Rivers or
Down near Corpus. Down near Corpus.
Corpus, I think it was Three Rivers, Texas.
Yeah.
And Dr. Hector Garcia from Corpus Christi founded the American GI Forum and protested, and as a result of that, they buried him at Arlington Cemetery. But a lot of people in North Texas don't realize they are perfectly aware about the schools being segregated between whites and blacks. But there were so few of us here. I mean, they don't realize that there were also some schools that where only Mexican children attended, such as Cumberland, you know, although they were not segregated like the ones with the blacks. But in South Texas, we had segregated cemeteries. Now, if that isn't the worst kind of racism and discrimination, even in death. So those are the challenges and the problems that we had.
Yeah, and we had the Benito Juarez School in West Dallas, you know? Allwood School, they had a very little cafeteria, nothing else.
There was the William B. Travis School. A child, I don't know the name of the child, but the child burned the school down. And as a result of that, they got a new school. That's how they got a new school.
Well,
and of course, North Dallas was, by that time, in that part, North Dallas was all Chicano. And everybody in Dallas had graduated from North Dallas. All the power structure were North Dallas High School graduates because it was one of the only schools here.
And the Latinos went to Tech High School to learn a trade.
Yeah.
They didn't prepare them for college.
Right.
well, you've mentioned before, we've talked before, and you talked about some of the lawsuits that you filed to move things along in the system here in Dallas.
Well, the one, when I became a lawyer, the NAACP took me to New York City for a week and taught me to get involved in civil rights. So one of the things they were pushing then was to get on the grand jury and integrate the grand jury. So I came and I did a lot of research and everything, and I got all prepared and put the word out that I needed a big case to challenge the grand jury. Sam Daugherty and Pat Robinson, who's still a judge out in Highland Park, and we had a guy named Cantu, and he was charged with murder. He was the perfect Mexican American. His father was from Mexico, his mother was from the United States. And so we put it on about 40 of these top people, and then they got him not guilty. But it had the impact because Henry Wade said, we're not doing this again. So then they started integrating the grand jury. See, they always use the old excuse, Adelfa heard it 100 times, nobody will serve. You can't afford to serve. Hey, come on. And that's the same thing with the political process.
Well, you were one of the...
If you're a candidate and if people have something to go vote for, they go vote. Otherwise, they don't go vote.
You worked with a lot of the African American groups here in Dallas.
Yeah.
You were one of the few, no, Latinos to do so?
Yeah. But it was there weren't that many lawyers. There were no African American lawyers doing what we were doing. I mean, it was C.B. Bunkley, W.J. Durham, and they were older, and they did some good legal work, but there wasn't very many doing it.
Well, why do you think, is there a different agendas for Mexican Americans than there are for African Americans here in the city?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's sort of like I always used to ask in terms of brown Americans or in terms of older Americans, they would say, well, Frank, is it easier to try an age discrimination or a race discrimination? And I would say age. And they would say, why? Everybody grows old, nobody grows black. The Mexican Americans, we were 3% of the population, probably 2% was illegal, 1/2 of 1% voted. I mean, they didn't have anything.
And that's
It-
it
They had
seems,
no power.
yeah,
Yeah.
that seems to be some of the same problems we have today still.
Well, except now we have 43% of the population and probably 20% illegal.
But,
And
but only 10% votes.
Well, I know, but they're getting better.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're getting
yeah.
better.
Vote gana, you know.
We can make the difference.
What do you see then, the difference between back then and today? Do you see a lot of changes that have occurred, or do you still see a lot of the same issues and a lot of the same Latinos fighting Latinos type of issues as well?
No, I think that's I've always been of the opinion that is in all society. We used to talk about the crabs in the basket, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every time a Latino tried to get up out of the basket, another crab would pull him down. But if you pay attention, that happens in the white community, it happens in the brown community, it happens in the black community.
Sure.
That's not the problem. The problem is I think that we have not now. Now we have the numbers. Now we don't have the knowledge, or as Adelfa says, we haven't developed enough leadership to be on all fronts. See, we're doing pretty good at city council, but we're not doing any good at county commission, right?
Right.
We're
There's
doing
no
better.
Hispanic
We're doing
in it.
better at school board now, but we're not doing so much better in the state legislature, etc.
You know, two things happened in the 1960s that energized, going back to that word, that energized political participation and involvement in the black community, in the Chicano community, across the nation. And when we speak of the 1960s and 70s, we're basically talking, when we speak of Latino, we're speaking of the Mexican-American community, certainly in the Southwest. But it's interesting that it happens here in Dallas, and it happens everywhere in one way or another in the late 60s, mid-late 60s, and continuing into the 70s. And that was that in the, you would know the date better than I can't remember it, but in what was it, 62, 63, the poll tax comes to a screeching halt. Amen. You know, and in 64 and 65, you have the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. So the involvement, the commitment, remember, there's a big separation there among the white electorate as well, in terms of the partisan preferences post, 64 and 65 that we're living still with today. Consequences, and certainly here in the South, if you call Texas the South today, but the poll tax ending and federal commitment to enfranchising people, and the federal programs that come out of that whole from federal ferment policy making, wonderful stuff for getting people involved, and it happens community after community, very important.
And the poll tax came to a screeching halt because Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez, when he got to Congress, the very first bill he put into the Congress was you don't have to pay a poll tax to vote for the president or the vice president.
And he was elected in 62.
Took care of it.
The first Mexicano.
Yeah.
And the fee was $1.75, and how could people making 25 cents an hour pay $1.75 for the right to vote?
Yeah. We used to have parties and dances on that if you showed your poll tax, you got in free.
Yeah,
And you'd be out there trying to sell poll tax.
that was my first civic project.
So there really have been major changes that you've seen occur over the past.
Well, the changes
40,
have
50
occurred.
years.
The changes began to occur when they built the Earl Cabell building and the federal building, and we had all of these people coming in with college degrees. We had such few people. When I arrived here in Dallas in 1939, there weren't more than 4 Latinos with college degrees. In 1939. In 1939, there was 1 Mexican-American teacher in the entire Dallas Independent School District. 22 years later, when I graduated from law school in 1961, they managed to find 2 more qualified ones. And the first teacher that they hired her, her father was a Presbyterian minister. So if you were a Mexican and you were a Catholic, forget it. You weren't going to get the job. And so that's the history. I mean, 1 teacher in 1939 and 3 in 1961. That tells the whole story about Dallas, about, the African Americans. You talk about the agenda. Our agenda had to be different from theirs because we have the language. We have the language barrier, plus the fact that we had the highest rate of school dropouts. And so without an education, but when the Earl Cabell building was built and people like Hector Flores and just a lot of people came in and they were all with college degrees. So it was great. There were only a few of us. There were only 6 Hispanic lawyers in 1967. And so when these other people came, they all had college degrees. They worked for the government. and they were involved. And so it was great because then we had numbers, a few more numbers. And that made a difference.
Well, the school desegregation plan started in about 73, 74, I guess. And that's really when we start to see the changes in the school district, and we start to see more Latinos, more Mexican Americans and Latinos in general being educated and graduating. So it's taken a good 20, 30 years to get enough Latinos graduated and into, I think, the middle class and getting into positions with college degrees and getting into professions. So now we begin to see in Dallas more Latino professionals and people who are willing to get involved and take leadership positions. Is that how you see this?
Yes.
I see some of it. I don't see too much activism.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that they're normal Dallasites. They chase the American dollar and they live in big houses, and the unions have very little effect nowadays. And, you know, I mean, I went to an American Heart Association function 2 years ago with William James Olmos, and as many people as I know in this community and know me, out of 500 people, I knew about 10 people. All the rest of them, middle managers, AT&T, GTE, all of them. And they're there. They're all out there. And they're all making, you know, good money, good jobs. And they're all over. It used to be right up the corridor from Harry Hines, you know. First it was Little Mexico. They destroyed that. Then it was up Harry Hines. And now it's, you know, like my cousin in Houston says 10 years ago, you would ask him, Wedo, where you live? He says, I live on Hastings in Houston. It's in the barrio. And now you ask him and say, Wedo, where you live? He said, I live in Houston. It's the barrio. And that's kind of the way it is in Dallas. It's getting that way, right?
Yeah.
The black population is sort of stagnant at 22%, and we're continuing to evolve. And so, but that's what I think it is. And
The problem is, I think, is that we don't have the advocates. You see, when there were only 6 or 7 lawyers, we were all advocates. We met once a month, sometimes twice a month, and met to find out what we're going to do. We didn't have, as you used to say, that there were so few of us. We couldn't make a whole lot of difference. We should make cause a lot of trouble to a lot of people.
Well, what she's trying to tell you is I took a lot of heat one time because I made this quote in the newspaper talking about Rene Martinez or something, and Buzz Crutcher said something about, well, what are the Mexican Americans going to do? And I said, well, you know how we are. We're like a bunch of cockroaches. We can't win anything, boy, but we can sure mess things up.
Yeah.
And, man, they came on me for 3 years. Don't call us cockroaches.
Excuse me. But we were all advocates, you see, and today you don't find that. They're all very satisfied, the lawyers. I mean, we go down to the courthouse and they'll stop me and they'll say, oh, guess what? We need to do this. We need to do that. I said, well, go do it. No, they won't listen to me, Adelfa. You do it. Yeah. I said, what do you mean? How do you think? Call the commissioners, call whomever. They're not interested in devoting the time to protect the community. And I think that lawyers have a particular obligation because, I mean, who should be involved in the rights of people if not lawyers? It shouldn't be architects and engineers and doctors. It should be attorneys. But the attorneys sometimes aren't even advocates for themselves, let alone for the community. And you know, I mean, but today, I mean, you can find some progress. You can walk down the street on Elm Street and stop some people and ask them to give you the name of 3 African American leaders, and they'll tell you, or 3 Hispanic leaders. So I guess progress has been made. But if you ask them as somebody who represents the poor whites, all special interests.
So, do you think then that the immigration marches, fast forward to today, the immigration marches of in April, do you think maybe that's the beginning of a new consciousness, social consciousness here of trying to link up with a human rights movement in the city?
Absolutely. I mean, we've got the numbers, and as Frank says, well, we have to train them how to govern. We haven't had the training to govern. That's why we need the Leadership Institute.
I don't think that is. I think that has the potential, but I think the immigration issue fractures people so much that it won't. But it does indicate that there's the potential there that we could do it. But we're not really doing it. I mean, there's, like Adelfa said, there's nobody that's really pushing.
Why do you think then that Latinos in Dallas we have moved forward, but you think we're just kind of like now just?
Well, you see, one of the things that people don't realize is the fact that we don't have a national leader, like Jesse Jackson, for instance, okay? A national leader that is willing to go to wherever that person, wherever there's a crisis, wherever there's a problem. Jesse Jackson will go to Puerto Rico to fight for Puerto Ricans, you know? I mean, he's not Puerto Rican. You see, we don't have a national leader. We have local leaders. I think Cesar Chavez came closer than anybody to being a national leader, but unfortunately he died. That's one thing that is missing. The other thing is that, you know, the blacks had their religious leaders behind them. We never have. For the first time in April at the march, the bishop was with us, marching. That was unheard
Historic.
of. Exactly. If the Catholic churches would tell the parishioners to go out and vote, that to not vote is a sin, they'd go out and vote. But you see, the black churches do a good job.
Well, and I think the other thing is that I never understood why the Republicans, well, to a certain extent, I guess I do, but you see, Americans of Mexican descent, like Mexicans of Mexican descent, are extremely conservative. I mean, they're landowners. First thing they do, they come make a contract, they get a contract to buy the land. That's how they wound up owning all of Little Mexico, right? And fortunately, we got a rezone for them, so they all got lots of money. But they're basically conservative. I used to fight so many times with Mexican-American groups because I was representing black Americans, and they would be mad at me. And then when I would represent Chicanos, then they would be happy. But they're basically conservative, and it's hard to motivate them and to make them move. And I think part of that comes, and I'm not a historian, from this whole thing from 1492 when they killed all those Indians and integrated them into Mexicans, and here we are. I mean, it's a, you know, pretty strong but docile. We had some Cesar Chavez, but Cesar Chavez was limited to farm workers. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not been there.
Yeah, my comment, my observation, I've been here, I've been in North Texas starting my 7th year, and I lived in LA in Southern California for 12 of them in Los Angeles, and participated during the 90s, certainly in a lot of the great struggles on immigrant rights and civil rights, affirmative action, you know, what was it, 229, whatever, 209, against affirmative action, and was a voter actually in all of those elections on the losing side. But you know, you're fighting for something, like you said, you got to have something to fight for to be motivated to vote. But the point is, you know, one of the greatest, the single largest growing cohort in the labor movement at the end of the 20th century and at the beginning of the 21st are Latino workers, Latino immigrant workers in particular, documented and undocumented. And the labor movement knows that. In the late 90s, the labor movement nationally, officially at one of their conventions, I can't remember, said, you know what, that long historic anti-immigrant posture that we've maintained, we're gonna throw it out the window. You know, we're not going to go there anymore, because they recognize that coming out of California, coming out of Chicago, coming out of New York, certain places in the country where the labor movement was particularly strong, and this motivated the Latino electorate, and this motivated progressive segments of the American electorate in ways that I don't necessarily see here in Dallas. In a march of the size, I mean, the largest civic march ever in the history of the state of Texas, period, that happened here on April 9th, on that Sunday, on a march of that size, 500,000 human beings. If you had that march out in Los Angeles, and there were some marches that were even larger, 1 million people marched in LA there this past spring at one march, you would have seen hundreds and thousands of signs and posters and banners of different unions. The labor movement is involved in the civic process, and there isn't that participation here. What we don't have here, and I'm sure that the downtown clique, you know, whoever controls things here in Dallas, doesn't want to see it happen. But what you need to have happen in the Latino community, because our people are there working. The majority in the Latino community, Mexicano and otherwise, continues to be working class. Maybe a third of the population. The gains of the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s put a lot of our gente, put a lot of our people in the middle class, like you were explaining exactly. And that's great. That's what the struggle was in part about. But the majority continue to be working class, and we need to get them. You really need to organize the downtown hotels. That would be verboten here in Dallas, but that's what happened in LA, in San Francisco, in Chicago, in New York. That's part of what needs to happen.
I think part too is because Texas is a right-to-work state, right? So we don't have that.
Right.
Right. I mean, the union's not very strong here. Never have been.
So, in conclusion, before we open it up for a Q&A, would you like to kind of comment on what you think is the single most important event that you saw that maybe turned the tide here in Dallas? If you can name an event that perhaps affected Latinos that maybe most of us don't realize affected us.
I think probably the redistricting, I would say, would have had a more lasting impact. Now, we didn't touch on the injustice by the police department, the Santos Rodriguez and all of that. That was when we marched downtown, where the police would stop a gathering of Latino males and just ask them if they had their immigration papers, and there were just all kinds of injustices that were perpetrated on them. And we were very involved in all of that. But I think that probably the redistricting, I would say, would probably have the most lasting impact.
I don't know. There's so many things happen. But I think I have two quick stories, and it'll give you some idea of what the thinking was. In 1976, when we were doing the Triracial Committee and we were doing the school desegregation, and we had Judge Mac Taylor appointed us. It was one New Year's Eve, and Dave Fox, who was really a nice guy, and we agreed about it on 85% of everything, but it was that 15%. But he invited me to go have a drink with Bloomberg, his lawyer from a big law firm at the LTV Tower. So we're walking across Pacific Avenue, and he says, well, Frank, I think it was a good thing. I said, what's that, Dave? He says, I think it was a good thing that we passed the Civil Rights Act back in 1871. And I said, well, yeah. I said, Dave, you think we might get around to implementing it? And he said, God, man, there you are. You're never satisfied. That was the attitude, okay?
Yep.
When Pedro Aguirre ran the second time, the white liberal decided he wanted to be on the city council because he'd already done his 2 CCA terms. So he runs against Pedro Aguirre. And they had Buzz Crutcher and Cousin Stemmons had told us they would give us all the money we needed. And so we put in a request for like $85,000, and we got maybe 35. And we were having a problem with some things, so I called Cousin John Stemmons, and he said, bring the candidate at 5, Frank. So I get Pedro, and we go up to Stemmons' office, and there he is. And Pete, the ultimate guy that's, real smooth. We sit down, and Cousin Stemmons comes over, and Pete says, it's very, very nice for you to have us here. He said, well, that's fine. You want a drink? He said, yeah. So Pete is going to get him a drink, me a drink, and Pete nudges me. He said, I never thought that John Stemmons would be making us a drink here at his office. And by that time, Cousin Stemmons is back, and Pete said, it sure is nice of you to have us up here at the cocktail hour. And Cousin John Stemmons got one of those big old glasses. He said, I don't know about you, boy, but my cocktail hour starts at 10 in the morning. We got a little more money, but it was, there's so many things have happened, it's hard to tell. Desegregation lawsuits, single-member districts, judges, more judgeships opening up. You know, I mean, look at Adolf Canales, 20 years. You never thought Adolf would last that long or anybody.
He's one of the 7.
Republican. If you changed over, you could do it. And a lot of Hispanics didn't do it.
We got Denise Garcia.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Manny Alvarez is a Republican in the criminal district courts.
Yeah.
So we have bit by bit, increments and increments. We end up.
But you know, a lot of the Hispanics, they don't want to run for judge or anything. There's an opening at the courthouse on the Patricia Diaz Heartline, who was going to the municipal court. And I went around and asked everybody to see if they would apply. Nobody wanted to apply. I finally got 2 people to apply. And they should have somebody who speaks Spanish. There's so many things that need to be done that really are not done. There's no delivery of justice to the Spanish-speaking community. If you go to the courts, if you go to for instance, the child support courts, you go there and the judges will tell, there's a whole room full of people, and about 80% of them are all Latinos, and I would venture to say that probably 80% of them do not understand a word of English. And the judge will tell them all about their rights, and they can do parental testing if they don't think the child is there, and so forth and so on. It goes on for about 40 minutes, and they didn't understand any of it. So I asked him, I said, at the very least, you should have a bailiff who speaks Spanish, you should have a clerk who speaks Spanish, but these are the things, you see, that need to be done. You need the advocates to get it done. It's not going to happen. And the changes we have made, they have been made because we were militant and because we were advocates. We marched, we boycotted, we filed lawsuits.
But some of you also worked within the system, and some of you worked within the system, and that's how y'all ended up. There was a group of y'all, there was about 12 of y'all that ended up being called the Dirty Dozen.
Yeah, but we gave them a chance to do the right thing, and if not, though, I mean, we let them know we were prepared to boycott, and if you're not prepared to boycott and to file lawsuits and to march, I don't think you have the right to call yourself a leader. Because sometimes it requires that. In fact, almost everything we have accomplished has required that. Nobody gave us anything. It all had to do by filing lawsuits and boycotting and threatening. Shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not a popularity contest.
Well, let's open this up for questions, if we can. Yes, would you step to the mic, please?
There's been a lot of discussion of the use of words to describe ethnic groups. Kinky Friedman got in the news recently. We think of how Richard Pryor used the N-word. We see Jewish comedians, young ones that are making jokes about the Holocaust. What is your opinion about making jokes about Hispanics? In other words, I remember a news story, I think it was on Channel 8 a few years back, about these bobblehead dolls and how there were divisions within the Hispanic community. Some said it reinforced negative stereotypes, and others just laughed it off. So the issue I'm addressing is not something unique to Hispanics at all. It's something that everyone is somewhat sensitive about. I guess it may depend on whether it's an outsider that's making a joke about some other group that they're not a member of. But what is do you understand what I'm asking? What is your general opinion of that?
My opinion is you ought to not degrade yourself. You see, in my household, my son was in the black fraternity at Texas A&M, wound up being president of Kappa Alpha Psi, and he would bring 4 or 5 or 6 black football players from A&M up to the apartment. I'd have to go tell the manager, don't worry, they're all right, they're going to be here. But you don't use the N-word in my house. Because you don't need to degrade yourself. And it does matter whether you respect yourself or not. Because how you expect them to respect you.
Right.
You see?
For instance,
and I don't have a problem telling a good friend of mine, Hartless Wade, used to write the golf column for the Morning News. He used the N-word all the time. Say, Hartless, stop that. I'm going to go drink beer with somebody else. And he would probably be the first one to support me, but just the habit, his age, the whole thing, I think it's terrible.
I see.
And I don't think that it can be made funny, but not too much.
It may be generational. I don't have anything with me, but I found web pages on the internet where young Hispanics use the N-word to describe themselves. To them, it's not an insult. In other words,
describe themselves?
Yes, yeah, I know. I wish I had the web pages here. I'd have to go to brownpride.com and some of the other websites that young Hispanics go to. But when they look at what young blacks have accomplished, I mean, in athletics, in music, and other fields, blacks are setting the pace. I mean, you know, there are a lot of whites that wish they had some of the skills and abilities that blacks have. So to me, it's not derogatory, but I'm neither black or Hispanic, so I can't comment from that angle, and I was just curious about that point of view.
There's that, what's his name, Arellano, I forget his last name, but the Dallas Observer's carrying the column now by the Orange Weekly columnist, what's his name? Have you seen it? Have you read it?
No, I don't.
All I know is that I don't appreciate the
But it's
Dallas
self-deprecating.
Observer with Ask a Mexican, you know. You ever read that column? It's a waste. I think, you know, I don't see anything funny about it, but then I'm old now, and so, you know.
Well, actually, I like it. I think it's Ask a Mexican. It's
Ask a Mexican.
Ask a Mexican, yeah. It's a column that is from California, as you mentioned.
Right.
And I think it is generational. I think something like that to me is like it's you have the ability to laugh at yourself, but sometimes it's misplaced. I think because there are so many young people who feel that and I've heard this described by young people many times. Some Latinos think that to be successful in school is to be white. And that is so sad that they think that way, that they don't realize that to be successful in school is to just be human and to take pride in yourself. But yeah, I think it's generational. I think it's changing. I don't know if it's for the better or for the worse, but.
And you know, you have Chicanos and Latinos on TV now, maybe not in enough channels, but if you go to cable TV, there's Latino Laugh Festival, there's Carlos Mencia's on there. There are different programs on different cable stations where you can actually go see Latinos you know, doing humor oftentimes on themselves.
Another question.
Well, I used to get a lot of arguments with the Chicanos and Chicanismo and that because first of all, I would remind them that brown is not a race.
Yeah.
That's the first thing.
That's the first thing.
And we're Caucasian. And Brown versus the Board of Education came out in 1954, but a couple of months before that, Hernandez versus Texas came out. And Hernandez versus Texas was the Supreme Court saying, you may be an American of Mexican descent, but you're Caucasian. And so that would cause problems, but it didn't cause me a problem because I benefited from that because when I applied at Texas A&M, they had to take me. Had I been black, I'd been at Prairie View A&M. And if you don't think there's a difference between Prairie View and Texas A&M, I know of a bridge up there in Brooklyn that you ought to be buying. And that would cause a lot of problems. And when I go to these demographers and listen to all this, I say, brown is not a race. Why is this a minority-majority city? We're Caucasian.
Well, there is difference of opinion on that issue as well,
Sure.
because we're actually, I would agree, this is just from everything I've gleaned from anthropologists, that even anthropologists don't refer to races anymore. They refer to ethnic groups. We're all different ethnic groups.
They should do that.
And so it's a weird use of the term that we still use, race, when actually we're more ethnic, go by ethnicities than anything else.
Who else?
I'd like us to discuss or get your reactions to this thought. I grew up in Dallas. Grew up on Pearl Street before Pearl, the current Pearl, and left and joined a religious community, and just have been back about 4 years working in Dallas. I'm an organizer with Dallas Area Interfaith.
Sister Consuelo Tobar.
Sister Consuelo Tobar.
Is that her name?
Yes.
Yes. And one of the things that we try to do when we organize, and the way we organize, is to really look at the community and try to understand what is that community, what's it about, and how do they operate, and do they want to work for change? And I so agree with something you said, Ms. Callejo, about the lack of advocates today. But But we look at advocates as coming from a community. And there's a lack of community and institutions that make up community. And when I was growing up in Little Mexico, we may have been very poor, very low income, but we were rich in social capital because we had a community. We had our church, we had our schools, we had our neighborhood. People knew one another, families knew one another. And I'm already fourth, fifth generation. So we were all citizens. And I remember my father having to pay the poll tax. I remember my father seeing him cry when Kennedy was killed. I'd never seen my father cry. And my father didn't go to church, but the social capital around him helped him raise us. And the rest of us were, always at church. Everything happened around that little 2-mile radius. That has, then, we have these real changes in our communities, and not just in Dallas, it's all over our country. The mobilization, people moving, the economy, and then the immigration. We have opportunities now, I think, because we have the numbers, and we have families that have now come and have begun to start their families here. But we need to get into the institutions, the churches, the schools, government, our neighborhoods, and strengthen the leadership there.
Exactly.
Form the leadership there around the issues that are important to people. And we've got to agitate that.
Yes.
So I think there's a need for new advocates who are to be agitators more among ourselves, because we are not strong enough to really take hold and shape these communities and take hold and shape Dallas. And I see the same thing happening with African Americans. Anybody who has made it financially leaves Dallas among the African Americans. They're all in the suburbs. And
You need the participation. The encouragement has to be participation. And with participation comes advocacy. It's just advocacy has, for some people, is a bad word, but it shouldn't be. It's not a bad word.
that's right.
It's like some people think money is bad, but they have to start out by learning how to participate in those institutions, and then they will be trained on how to lead, and they can govern themselves, which is the ideal situation.
Right. And those of you who started this out, you were the advocates, but you were advocating for yourselves in those communities. And that's why I'm saying we can't have advocates come from outside. They've got to come. We've got to teach people to be their own advocates. And the tighter and the more connected they are to each other will give rise to the advocates, to the leaders for the community.
Exactly.
What I hear is that you're saying that we should take ownership of our own issues and our own community and resolve them ourselves.
And then they will vote. When they do that, they will vote.
That's right. Because that's really the power. I mean, we don't need the money. It helps. It really helps. But we need the power of relationships with one another and networking and connectedness. So and that only comes if people really get to know one another, so they can then stand together for what they trust each other, so they can act together.
Exactly. Thank you for your leadership.
But you have to be careful. I always say you have to be careful. You see, you don't have to be brown to represent browns, and you don't have to be black to represent blacks, or be white to represent white. What you have to be able to do is be a good leader and include all of those people. When we have significant change in this country is when middle-class white America decides it's time to change. That's when we get significant change. When they saw Bill Curry doing it to those kids, they sat in those living rooms and said, that could be my daughter. We're going to change that. And we're not quite there, but our institutions are getting richer. We now have, 40 in the top 500 Hispanic companies in Dallas. Companies making $150 million a year, mostly on tax dollars. They have to give back to the community. We got to convince them the money's going to the right places. But that's I know it's a real difficult thing, but it's got to be that way.
Last question. Okay.
You guys have been in the trenches. You are very educated, very well read. I see people in Dallas also advocating on other issues that could affect Dallas. What I don't see a lot of Dallas doing is representing Texas. And I want to know what people think around here about that wall they're talking about building across Texas. And is there any advocacy against that? Or where do people stand on that? I mean, I don't read about it. I don't read any comments about it. And I don't hear anything about it. I just hear that Congress wants to, some people in Congress want to do this. And I don't know, is there anything out in the community about that or any feelings?
The border is 1,952 miles long. 2,000 it usually gets quoted, and Texas has about 1,100 to 1,200 of those miles. So it is a Texas issue. I grew up on the border, and in Eagle Pass, and it would be a real travesty to see a wall go up in La Vega, you know, the river, the plain, the floodplain, and what I would like to say is that the reasons why people are coming to this country is, I mean, unprecedented in a sense in the history of humankind, certainly in the Western Hemisphere. This migration that we've been living and witnessing, but if you build a wall, you're building a wall not across a state, not across 4 states, and 4 or 5 states on the other side, on the Mexican side as well. You're building a wall across an entire continent. I mean, when in the history of humankind, ask yourself that question, when in the history of humankind have humans built a wall across an entire continent where we're wanting to divide ourselves from those people over there? It's not going to work. It's a big mistake if it happens.
The thing, I think most Hispanic organizations are on record for opposing it. I feel offended if they want to build a wall there. How come they're not building one between the United States and Canada?
Well, it's part of what's happened is we learned and we know how to move capital from country to country. We can move capital very easy. You can wire the money to Mexico City, Guadalajara. You know, Western Union makes how many millions of dollars off our people. But we haven't learned how to move people. And part of it is the systemic racism that still is in existence. But they're finding out in this country, for example, that little town in Georgia where they destroyed that town, right? They started arresting them, and all of a sudden there's no more town. That's not going to happen too much. All of the fruit is dying on the vine in California. That's not going to last too long. You know, the first year you might get the insurance. The second year the premium is going to be a lot higher, etc. We need to learn how to move people. But in order to do that, Mexico has to cooperate a great deal. Quit sending us all of their poor people. You know, it used to be 30 years ago when you had a Mexican family 40 years ago that came over, they were all considered toda familia, never get divorced, good Catholics, work hard, do anything for you, and of course they grew a lot of flowers. Now half of the people, drug people, running from felonies, and it's not the same person coming over. And so, but Mexico's got to help us do that because we can't do it on our own. And so I don't know what if you were a secretary and you want to go to work in Acapulco for 2 years, you can't do it. Mexico won't let you do it because you're displacing one of their skilled workers. So that's that, and unfortunately, I think you'll read about it before too long. some people are going to get killed on that wall or over that wall, and once that happens, then you're going to have a different problem because you have to decide who's going to patrol those people.
Who's going to build it? The undocumented.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your thoughts tonight. And thank
I
you
want
for
to give
coming.
them
Mercedes.
I want to give them the present.
Oh, right. Frank has a poster that he would like to give everybody from 1983 it was the John F. Kennedy Memorial Observance. So this is a collector's item probably.
Thank you.
If I may express our gratitude on behalf of the museum for your presence here today, let me remind you that the most important aspect of our mission is connecting the legacy of President Kennedy to contemporary issues. In addition to the exhibit we have on the 6th floor, we try to make it relevant, his life and his legacy. And the panel today has just been outstanding. Adelfa and Frank have given us a first-hand experience. They've shared that experience with us. And those of us that are perhaps a younger generation, or those of us that have migrated to Dallas more recently, did not have the benefit of that experience. And just listening to them today inspires us. And number one, a sense of gratitude for what they accomplished and the benefits that we receive today that sometimes we may have taken for granted, thinking that, well, this is the way it's always been. And secondly, thanks to Roberto for putting that local experience, Dallas experience, in the national context, and what Dallas did or didn't do as the movements occurred outside of Dallas. So I can't tell you how grateful we are for your presence, for what you shared with us today. And then Mercedes, your moderating the program has been excellent. You have picked fantastic panel members here. We're grateful to you as well. So join me in thanking them again.